Blood calls to blood. In the grim darkness of the far future, where hope is the first casualty and mercy a forgotten weakness, some souls answer that crimson summons so completely they forget they were ever human at all. Listen now to the thunder of brass drums echoing through the immaterium, to the endless screaming that has become a lullaby in the eye of terror. Watch as a single drop of vitae strikes ancient ceramite, its impact resonating through dimensions unknown, revealing mountains of skulls that stretch beyond any horizon the mortal mind can comprehend. What does it take to damn a soul so completely that even death becomes a mercy they will never receive? The answer lies bleeding in the void between stars, where a thing that was once a space marine still remembers its first kill with the clarity of a lover's caress. On the world of Tertius Majoris, carved from living stone at the edge of the maelstrom's writhing madness, Brother Captain Marcus Thane of the Iron Hawks chapter once walked as a hero among heroes. The fortress monastery rose from the planet's crust like a prayer made manifest in rockcrete and adamantium, its spires reaching toward the Emperor's distant light with the desperate hunger of the faithful. Within those sacred halls, morning prayers echoed with voices raised in perfect unison, 10,000 years of tradition flowing through each syllable like blood through sanctified veins. Marcus Thane. Remember that name, for it will not survive this telling. 2 centuries of faithful service marked his record in letters of gold and blood, each commendation a testament to unwavering loyalty. Veterans of the Badab War spoke his name with reverence, for he had stood firm when brothers turned against brothers, when the very foundations of trust crumbled beneath the weight of political necessity. His blade had tasted traitor blood and found it bitter, his faith tested in the crucible of fratricidal warfare and emerged seemingly unbroken. But faith, like ceramite, can develop hairline fractures invisible to the naked eye, stress points that spread and multiply until the moment of catastrophic failure arrives with the suddenness of a bolt round to the skull. The siege of Hive Mortalis began like so many others, a grinding exercise in urban warfare where every corridor became a killing ground and every civilian a potential threat. The Iron Hawks descended from their orbital strike cruisers like avenging angels, their drop pods scarring the city's flesh in patterns that would have been beautiful were they not harbingers of such methodical destruction. Marcus led his battle brothers through the Underhive's labyrinthine depths, where the Emperor's light had never penetrated, and darkness bred things that defied both reason and sanity. It was there, in tunnels slick with industrial runoff and human misery, that the cultists first whispered their poison into receptive ears, not his ears, not at first. The corruption began with his battle brothers, those stalwart souls he had fought beside for decades. Watch Sergeant Caveth, whose tactical brilliance had saved 3 companies during the Xeran compliance. Battle brother Titus, whose chainsword had sung hymns of destruction across a dozen worlds. One by one, Marcus watched them fall to enemy fire, their life signs winking out on his tactical display like dying stars. One by one, he watched the Imperium they had sworn to protect abandon them to bureaucratic incompetence and political maneuvering. Supply drops delayed by requisition forms filed in triplicate, artillery support redirected to protect noble estates, while his brothers died in forgotten tunnels. Air cover diverted to evacuation zones, where only the wealthy could afford passage off-world. How many of your brothers must die for the Imperium's failures before you question everything you have sworn to protect? The thought crept into Marcus's mind like infection into an untreated wound, growing stronger with each fallen friend, each tactical blunder that cost lives for the sake of preserving bureaucratic protocol. The doubt started small, almost reasonable. Perhaps the local command structure was compromised. Perhaps the corruption ran deeper than mere battlefield incompetence. Perhaps, in the labyrinthine machinery of imperial governance, the very systems meant to support the Astartes had become obstacles to be overcome rather than tools to be wielded. Small compromises followed, each one feeling righteous at the time, abandoning predetermined patrol routes to pursue tactical advantages, requisitioning supplies from civilian stockpiles to keep his remaining battle brothers operational, ignoring direct orders that would have led his men into obvious kill zones while their superiors observed from orbital safety. Each compromise carved away another fragment of the absolute obedience that had once defined him. Each independent decision strengthened a growing whisper in the deep places of his mind, a voice that suggested honor and duty might be very different things indeed. The voice spoke in frequencies below human hearing, resonating through his enhanced nervous system like the subsonic rumble of tectonic plates shifting toward inevitable catastrophe. And in the deep places of his mind, something ancient and terrible began to listen. The breaking point arrived with the precision of an orbital bombardment and the subtlety of a chainsword through the skull. Salvation's Gate, they called it on the tactical maps, a massive refugee processing center where civilians fled the advancing chaos of the siege. Marcus had positioned his remaining forces to defend the evacuation routes, his tactical genius evident in the overlapping fields of fire, and prepared fallback positions that would allow maximum civilian extraction with minimal casualties. Chapter Master Doriel arrived via Thunderhawk just as the first refugee convoys reached the gates. The elderly Astartes emerged from his transport like a figure from Imperial propaganda, his artificer armor gleaming with purity seals and his power sword crackling with barely contained energy. Marcus knelt as protocol demanded, but his enhanced senses detected something in his superior's biosigns that spoke of stress, perhaps even fear. The order came without preamble, delivered in the clipped tones of absolute authority. Brother Captain Thane, execute immediate sterilization protocols on all civilian personnel within the evacuation zone. Maintain operational security. No survivors. Marcus felt something crack inside his skull, a sound that might have been breaking bones or breaking faith. Around him, thousands of families huddled behind hastily erected barricades, their faces turned upward toward the space marines they had been taught to worship as the Emperor's own angels. Children clung to their parents' robes, elderly citizens leaned heavily on makeshift crutches, pregnant women held swollen bellies as if protecting the future itself from the madness of the present. Chapter Master. Marcus's voice emerged as a croak, his enhanced vocal cords struggling to shape words around the obstruction in his throat. These are loyal Imperial citizens. They have committed no crime save being born on a world touched by war. Doriel's helm turned toward him with the mechanical precision of a weapon system acquiring its target. They have been exposed to the taint, Brother Captain. They have seen things that compromise operational security. They have witnessed the methods we employ in the Emperor's name. They cannot be allowed to carry such knowledge beyond this world. The bolt of fire began without further discussion. Marcus watched his battle brothers turn their weapons on unarmed civilians, watched explosive rounds tear through flesh that had never held a weapon in anger, watched children die clutching toys fashioned from scrap metal and desperate hope. The massacre unfolded with the methodical precision of a training exercise, each volley calculated for maximum efficiency and minimum ammunition expenditure. Standing amid the expanding pools of blood and scattered debris that had once been human lives, Marcus Thane felt his faith crack along stress lines that had been building for decades. The sound was audible this time, a crystalline fracture that seemed to echo through dimensions beyond the merely physical. If this was the Emperor's will, if this methodical slaughter of the innocent was what his centuries of service had protected and preserved, then perhaps everything he had believed was built upon foundations of lies. If this is the Emperor's will, his mind whispered in frequencies that bypassed conscious thought, then perhaps the Emperor is wrong. The voice that answered him carried the weight of absolute truth and the warmth of molten brass. It spoke not of seduction or corruption, but of revelation. It reminded him that violence had always been his truth, that every battle he had fought, every enemy he had slain, every moment of glory he had achieved had come from the honest application of controlled brutality. The voice suggested that perhaps he had never been fighting for the right cause, but he had always been fighting in the right way. The first time Marcus felt the blood god's approval wash over him, it came not as corruption but as coming home. The sensation began as warmth in his primary heart, spreading through his enhanced cardiovascular system like liquid fire that burned away confusion and doubt and moral complexity. For the first time in decades, everything made perfect sense. The rituals of damnation require no grand ceremonies, no elaborate preparations carved in stone and sealed with virgin blood. Sometimes they unfold in ruined chapels where broken Aquila stare blindly at scenes their creators never imagined, where stained glass windows filter dying sunlight through fragments of shattered faith. Marcus Thane knelt alone among the debris of Salvation's Gate, surrounded by corpses that had begun to cool and congeal into the raw materials of his transformation. His power armor bore the weight of 2 centuries' worth of battle honors, each purity seal and service stud, a testament to unwavering loyalty now revealed as carefully constructed self-deception. The Iron Hawk's heraldry emblazoned across his chestplate began to burn from within, not with heat, but with the cold fire of absolute truth. Imperial eagles twisted and melted, their wings folding inward until they resembled brass skulls leering with empty sockets that had seen too much. In that moment, Marcus understood with crystalline clarity that he was not losing his humanity. He was discovering he had never really been human at all. Humanity implied capacity for mercy, for hesitation, for the soul-crushing weight of moral complexity that had nearly destroyed him. What emerged from the ruins of Marcus Thane was something purer, something honest in its brutality and glorious in its single-minded dedication to the only truth that mattered: violence. The first kill, as Khorne's own, came with the inevitability of orbital mechanics and the sweetness of absolution. Chapter Master Dorael found him in the chapel ruins, drawn by vox signals that had devolved into inhuman growling, punctuated by what might have been laughter or might have been screaming. The elderly space marine approached with his power sword already ignited, the blade's energy field casting dancing shadows across walls stained with more than mere blood. "Brother Captain Thane," Dorael's voice carried the weight of centuries, each word carefully chosen to convey both authority and the promise of redemption for a warrior who had simply witnessed too much. "You will submit to immediate psychic evaluation and purification rituals." This momentary lapse of faith, Marcus rose from his knees with liquid grace, his movements no longer bound by the mechanical precision of Astartes' combat doctrine but flowing with the predatory fluidity of something born to kill. The chainsword in his hands had begun to change, its blessed machine spirit replaced by something hungrier, something that whispered promises of eternal sharpness in exchange for eternal feeding. "There has been no lapse, my lord," Marcus replied, and his voice carried harmonics that made Dorael's enhanced hearing sensors screech feedback warnings. "Only awakening." The duel that followed lasted 17 minutes by the chapel's chrono display, though subjective time flowed differently in the presence of powers that recognized no mortal limitations. Dorael fought with the skill of a master swordsman and the desperation of a man who recognized that more than one life hung in the balance. Every parry rang with the clash of competing philosophies, every riposte carried the weight of 10,000 years of imperial dogma. But doctrine cannot stand against revelation, and techniques perfected in training cages cannot match instincts honed in the crucible of divine attention. Marcus fought not as he had been taught, but as he had always been meant to fight, his blade seeking the spaces between armor plates with the patience of erosion and the certainty of entropy. When Dorael's guard finally broke, when the chapter master's strength finally failed beneath the accumulated weight of defending against an opponent who had abandoned all concept of defense, the killing stroke came with the gentle precision of a lover's caress. The sensation of his former lord's blood splashing across his helm lenses triggered something in Marcus that transcended mere physical response. Euphoria flooded his enhanced nervous system like the most potent combat stimulants, but this high carried no side effects, no crushing aftermath of biochemical rebalancing. This was pure joy, honest pleasure, derived from the honest application of superior skill against a worthy opponent. For the first time in his post-human existence, Marcus Thane felt complete, and as his blade tasted the blood of his former lord, as the chapter master's twin hearts stopped beating in perfect synchronization, Marcus Thane died forever. Something else, wearing his face, began to hunt across the stars. The Eye of Terror welcomed its newest son with the enthusiasm of a forge master greeting premium materials. The daemon world that became his first fortress had no name in any human language, its geography defined by concepts that existed only in the spaces between mathematics and madness. Here, where the laws of physics served merely as suggestions and reality bent to accommodate the dreams of sleeping gods, Marcus learned what it meant to be truly free. Morning rituals in the service of the blood god require neither dawn nor standardized chronometers. Time flows according to the rhythm of hearts, beating in terror, and the percussion of skulls striking brass altars. Marcus would wake in chambers carved from crystallized screaming, walls that whispered with the voices of everyone he had ever killed. The sound was not torment but symphony, each voice contributing its unique note to a harmony that spoke of glorious purpose and absolute clarity. Prayer challenges screamed at the brass throne of Khorne replaced the measured litanies of his former faith. Where once he had recited catechisms of service and duty, now he roared demands for worthy opponents and promises of escalating slaughter. The blood god did not require obedience so much as enthusiasm, not worship so much as results measured in arterial spray and the wet sounds of tearing flesh. The morning executions were not cruelty but necessity, as essential to the warband's function as equipment, maintenance, and tactical planning. Weakness was a contagion that spread through any organization if left unchecked, and the only cure was immediate amputation. Marcus would stand in the center of his warriors' assembly, his altered physiology radiating pheromones that triggered aggressive responses in baseline humans and made even hardened traitor Astartes check their weapon safeties. The condemned would kneel before him, not in submission, but in gratitude for the opportunity to contribute one final service to the warband's effectiveness. Their deaths were quick, efficient, and absolutely necessary. Leadership in the service of Khorne demanded both the wisdom to recognize weakness and the strength to excise it before it could metastasize. The maintenance of weapons that drank blood and whispered promises of slaughter required techniques unknown to Imperial tech adepts. Marcus's chainsword had evolved beyond its original specifications, its teeth now grown rather than manufactured, its appetite requiring regular feeding to maintain optimal performance. The blade would purr when properly nourished, its satisfaction resonating through his enhanced nervous system like the contentment of a well-fed predator. Imagine waking each day knowing that your God demands proof of your worth, measured only in the suffering of others. Imagine finding that requirement not burdensome but liberating, a clear metric for success in a universe that had previously offered only confusion and moral ambiguity. The warband hierarchy that formed around Marcus reflected the brutal honesty of natural selection, accelerated to supernatural speeds. Mortal cultists who survived their first month of service earned the right to bear his mark, their flesh branded with symbols that provided protection from the daemon spawn that roamed the fortress corridors. Traitor Astartes from a dozen different chapters brought their own techniques and specializations, their genetic heritage mixing in combat formations that would have been impossible under Imperial doctrine. Daemon allies negotiated treaties, written in languages that existed only while being spoken, agreements that bound entities of pure concept to material reality through the application of will and the promise of mutual satisfaction. These were not subordinate relationships but partnerships between apex predators, each party contributing unique capabilities to the shared goal of maximum destruction. Constant challenges to his authority were not problems to be solved but gifts to be savored. Each aspiring rival represented an opportunity to demonstrate why he led and they followed, why his vision of perfect warfare deserved their support and their lives. The duels were conducted according to ancient protocols that predated human civilization, rules carved into reality itself by entities that had been refining the art of violence since before the first stars learned to burn. Managing alliances with other champions while planning their eventual betrayal required the same tactical brilliance that had once made him valuable to the Imperium, but now enhanced by supernatural insight into the fundamental nature of conflict. Marcus could read the currents of ambition and resentment that flowed through chaos politics, like an experienced navigator reading stellar cartography, adjusting his course to take advantage of favorable conditions while avoiding the gravitational wells of more powerful predators. The loneliness of leadership took on new dimensions when trust was weakness and mercy was heresy. Marcus ruled his followers through fear and respect in equal measure, his authority absolute but constantly tested, his position secure only so long as he remained more valuable alive than dead. The isolation was not punishment but privilege, the necessary separation between the commander who made the hard decisions and the followers who carried them out. The hunt never ends because endings are for mortals, and Marcus had shed mortality like a serpent shedding skin that no longer fit. Raiding across real space required the precision of a former tactical genius combined with the supernatural insight that came from divine patronage. His strike cruiser, the Crimson, Apostle had undergone modifications that would have horrified any tech priest fortunate enough to survive witnessing them. Machine spirits had been replaced with bound daemons, their hunger for destruction perfectly aligned with the vessel's new purpose. Void raids began with the poetry of orbital mechanics and ended with the prose of close combat. Marcus would study star charts with the intensity of a scholar and the patience of a predator, identifying targets not merely for their strategic value, but for the quality of opposition they would provide. A merchant convoy protected by aging escort frigates offered skulls but little glory. An Imperial Navy patrol squadron presented the possibility of worthy opponents and weapons that might prove challenging to acquire. The rush of boarding actions transformed each engagement into a religious experience. Marcus would lead the assault personally, his altered physiology allowing him to survive in hard vacuum, while his warriors breached airlocks and depressurization barriers. The moment of entry was always the same: explosive decompression, creating a fountain of atmosphere and bodily fluids, emergency lighting strobing across scenes of immediate devastation, and then the desperate scramble as defenders tried to organize resistance against opponents who had been planning this moment for decades. Every enemy offered a chance at glory, but the frustration grew when opponents died too quickly or surrendered too easily. Baseline humans would sometimes lose consciousness from sheer terror before his warriors could properly engage them. Imperial guardsmen trained for conventional warfare found themselves facing opponents who treated physics as optional and pain as recreational. Only fellow Space Marines provided the level of resistance that made victory meaningful, their enhanced physiology allowing them to survive long enough for proper duels to develop. Every battle is a prayer, every death an offering, but what happens when your god is never satisfied? Khorne's hunger was infinite, his appetite for violence growing with each feeding rather than diminishing. Marcus learned to read the blood god's moods in the way his weapons hummed, in the ease with which his warriors found worthy opponents, in the frequency of mutations that marked divine favor or displeasure. Between raids, in the rare quiet moments when the Crimson Apostle drifted through the immaterial currents of the warp, fragments of Marcus Thane would surface like debris from ancient shipwrecks. He would find himself staring at chapter heraldry carved into his armor, the Iron Hawk's iconography now twisted beyond recognition but still somehow familiar. The Aquila had become something with too many heads and not enough wings, its eyes weeping brass tears that never quite fell. Dreams of his former brothers visited him in these moments, their faces unmarked by the corruption that had claimed him. They spoke in voices he remembered from morning prayers and evening remembrances, reminding him of shared battles and common oaths. But the dreams always turned to nightmares, his former comrades screaming accusations that he could no longer understand the meaning of their words, dissolving into static that sounded increasingly like applause. The growing inability to remember why he had once thought their deaths were wrong troubled him less with each passing century. Moral complexity was a luxury he had abandoned along with his humanity, replaced by the crystal clarity of absolute purpose. His former brothers had died because they were weak, because they had clung to illusions that prevented them from achieving their true potential. Their deaths had been mercy disguised as violence, liberation masquerading as destruction. And in those moments of almost human weakness, something far worse stirred within him, reminding him that regression was not an option, and nostalgia was just another form of weakness to be excised. The mutations began as gifts from his patron deity, physical manifestations of divine favor that marked him as property of the blood god. Brass spikes erupted through his spinal column with the slow certainty of geological processes, each one perfectly positioned to enhance his combat effectiveness while serving as conduits for supernatural energy. The pain was exquisite, a constant reminder of his elevated status that resonated through his enhanced nervous system like a tuning fork struck by the hands of gods. His voice underwent changes that made normal conversation impossible with baseline humans. The vocal cords that had once delivered stirring battlefield speeches now produced harmonics that triggered fight or flight responses in anyone within hearing range. Words became weapons as surely as blades or bullets, each syllable carrying subsonic frequencies that could shatter glass and rupture eardrums. Communication with his followers required increasingly elaborate rituals and protective measures, but the power was worth the inconvenience. The way his mere presence drove baseline humans to murderous frenzy created tactical opportunities that had never existed during his Imperial service. A single boarding action could trigger ship-wide mutinies as crew members turned on each other with whatever weapons came to hand. Planetary invasions became exercises in applied psychology, as defender morale collapsed before the first shots were fired. Your body becomes a canvas for your god's artistry, whether you want it or not. The mutations were not random but purposeful, each change designed to enhance his effectiveness while marking him as unmistakably claimed. His hands developed secondary joints that improved weapon handling. His eyes acquired additional spectral sensitivity that revealed the emotional resonance of potential victims. His enhanced metabolism learned to derive nourishment from fear and pain as efficiently as from conventional nutrients. Lesser daemons attempted to use his body as a vessel with increasing frequency, drawn by the combination of supernatural power and mortal flesh that made him unique among Khorne's servants. The constant mental warfare against entities trying to steal his flesh required vigilance that never slept and will that never bent. Each attempted possession was simultaneously attack and test, the daemons serving as both enemies and inadvertent training partners. Fighting to maintain his identity while embracing inhuman transformation created paradoxes that would have driven a lesser mind to madness. Marcus learned to compartmentalize his consciousness, allowing controlled mutations while maintaining the core personality structures that made him valuable to his patron. The process required a level of self-awareness that bordered on the philosophical, forcing him to examine which aspects of his identity were essential and which were merely habitual. The realization that his will was perhaps the only recognizably human thing left about him came as relief rather than horror. Everything else could be sacrificed to the demands of warfare and divine service, but the spark of self-determination that allowed him to choose how and when to kill remained inviolate. This was not weakness but strength, not limitation but freedom expressed in its purest form. The terrifying question haunted his moments of deepest introspection. What if he had been possessed all along and never noticed? What if the voice that had spoken to him in the ruins of Salvation's Gate had not been revelation but infiltration, his apparent awakening merely the final stage of a corruption that had begun decades earlier? The possibility that his entire transformation had been orchestrated by forces beyond his comprehension added layers of uncertainty to decisions that had once seemed straightforward. Rival champions emerged from the Eye of Terror like predators drawn to the scent of success. Marcus's growing reputation as an effective field commander and successful raider made him a target for those who saw his position as an obstacle to their own advancement. The blood god's favor was finite, distributed among his servants according to merit measured in skulls collected and battles won. Every champion who rose in Khorne's estimation necessarily diminished the standing of those who remained static. Blood duels in the immaterial realm could last for subjective years, time flowing according to the whims of entities that existed outside conventional causality. Marcus fought campaigns within campaigns. His consciousness split between commanding his physical warband and engaging in single combat against opponents whose very existence challenged the fundamental laws of reality. These were not merely tests of martial skill, but examinations of philosophical commitment, each exchange of blows carrying the weight of theological argument. Betrayals by former allies taught him that paranoia was not mental illness, but survival instinct properly calibrated to environmental conditions. Brothers in arms who had fought beside him for decades would attempt to present his skull to the brass throne with the casual efficiency of career advancement. The attacks came without warning or justification beyond opportunity, forcing Marcus to maintain constant vigilance even among those he trusted most. The knowledge that every success made him a bigger target created feedback loops of escalating ambition and proportional danger. Each victory attracted more powerful rivals. Each rival defeated sent signals that drew even more dangerous challengers. The mathematics of reputation became a careful balancing act between displaying enough strength to command respect and avoiding so much success that he became irresistible prey for ancient champions whose patience was measured in millennia. In Khorne's service, your greatest enemy is not the Imperium but the warrior standing beside you, because loyalty is temporary, but ambition is eternal. The killing floor of Khorne's brass arenas provided entertainment for audiences that had never known mortality and growth opportunities for participants who might not survive the experience. Forced participation in tournaments where defeat meant final death stripped away any illusions about the nature of divine service. These were not exhibitions or training exercises, but competitions in their purest form, winner-take-all contests, where second place was measured in the time it took for decapitated heads to stop twitching. Fighting daemon princes required techniques that human martial arts had never contemplated. Opponents whose forms shifted according to emotional state, whose weapons existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, whose very presence warped local reality into configurations that favored their combat style. Marcus learned to adapt his tactics in real time, reading the subtle cues that telegraphed imminent reality alterations and positioning himself to take advantage of dimensional instabilities. Possessed war machines presented different challenges, their mechanical precision enhanced by daemonic cunning and their weapon systems powered by the torment of bound souls. These duels became exercises in applied engineering as much as swordsmanship, Marcus learning to identify critical system vulnerabilities while avoiding defensive measures that could liquefy flesh at the molecular level. Other champions brought their own specializations and obsessions, their fighting styles reflecting different interpretations of what it meant to serve the blood god perfectly. Some favored overwhelming aggression that burned through opponents like acid through armor. Others practiced patient precision, allowing enemies to exhaust themselves against defenses that gave way only when collapse would cause maximum psychological impact. The crowd of screaming daemons that wagered on contest outcomes added layers of complexity that would have been impossible in any mortal arena. Bets were placed in currencies of concept and emotion, their resolution affecting local reality in ways that could influence fight outcomes. A particularly popular champion might find his weapons performing beyond specifications, while a despised opponent discovered that critical equipment failures occurred at precisely the worst possible moments. The horrible realization that he had begun to enjoy the applause came as enlightenment rather than corruption. The validation of peers who understood excellence when they witnessed it, the acknowledgement of skill from entities whose entire existence revolved around the appreciation of perfected violence. For the first time since his transformation began, Marcus understood that he was not merely surviving in an alien environment, but thriving in his natural habitat. But the greatest torment was not the pain of transformation, or the constant threat of betrayal, or even the demands of beings whose power dwarfed his own. The greatest torment was discovering he no longer wanted any of it to stop. Khorne's ultimate test arrived without fanfare or formal announcement, manifesting as a simple choice presented in the aftermath of his latest arena victory. The blood god's attention focused on him with the weight of stellar masses, divine consciousness, examining every aspect of his service with the thoroughness of a tech adept performing machine spirit analysis. The offer was communicated not in words but in direct neural transmission, bypassing language entirely to plant understanding directly into his consciousness. Sacrifice your remaining human memories as tribute. Surrender the last fragments of Marcus Thane to become something greater than the sum of your accumulated experiences. Accept the gift of perfect clarity, purchased with the coin of personal history. The choice was simultaneously no choice at all, and the most important decision he would ever make. The memories were pain disguised as nostalgia, anchors to a past that served no function except to provide contrast to his current excellence. The image of his Primarch's face was fading anyway, each passing year making it harder to recall details that had once seemed permanently etched into his consciousness. His birth name had become meaningless syllables, sounds that referred to someone who had never truly existed. What would you do if forgetting everything you were was the only way to become everything you could be? Marcus chose damnation over stagnation, transformation over preservation, the unknown future over the familiar past. The memories dissolved like sugar in rain, their absence creating space for new experiences and enhanced capabilities. Where once he had carried the weight of 2 centuries worth of personal history, now he possessed the freedom of eternal present tense, each moment complete in itself without reference to arbitrary temporal frameworks. The final betrayal came disguised as a routine raiding mission, his patron deity commanding him to lead an assault against his former chapter's newest generation of initiates. The Iron Hawks had rebuilt their numbers with typical Astartes efficiency, their fortress monastery repopulated with young warriors who had never known the doubt that had originally corrupted their predecessor. These recruits wore the same colors Marcus had once bled for, their armor unmarked by the compromises and small betrayals that had ultimately led to his downfall. Watching them defend positions with the same tactical doctrines he had once mastered created resonances that bypassed conscious thought and struck directly at whatever remained of his original personality matrix. Recognition in the eyes of a young assault marine who still believed in everything Marcus had abandoned triggered responses that should have been purged along with his humanity. For a moment that lasted eternity, he saw himself reflected in their desperate faith and remembered what it felt like to fight for something other than the simple joy of fighting. The moment when killing them felt like killing his former self marked the completion of his transformation, the final severance of connections to a past that had served its purpose. The intoxicating relief when guilt stopped registering as emotional response confirmed that he had successfully excised the last traces of weakness from his psychological architecture. And in that moment of defiance disguised as loyalty, as he chose to remain mortal and damned rather than accept the transcendence of daemonhood, Marcus sealed his fate as something far worse than a daemon prince. He became the perfect weapon, neither fully human nor completely inhuman, blessed with eternal existence but cursed with infinite hunger for challenges that could never fully satisfy his evolved appetites. Somewhere in the Eye of Terror, a thing that was once named Marcus Thane sharpens his blade and plans tomorrow's slaughter. He does this not because Khorne commands it, not because voices in his head demand it, but because after 10,000 years of war, he has finally found something he is good at. And in the silence between his laughter and the screaming of his victims, you might almost hear an echo of the prayer he used to whisper as a loyal space marine. Emperor, preserve us from the darkness. But the darkness has already won. It just wears his face now.